John, welcome to the show. Good morning to have you on.
G'day. Yeah, on Queenstown, less is more. And the developer, I think his name's John Darby, he says that there's a law called Say's law that growth breeds growth.
There's a law of economics called the Say's law, which is growth feeds growth, really. And I think we're responding to the demands to increase capacity, whether it be for residential capacity, infrastructure, hotel rooms, to deal with the growth in tourism. And I really think that the more we respond to growth, the more we create the growth. That's the Say's law principle.
And you go back to like time of Warren Cooper, and his philosophy was that you just build it, and if you build it wrong, the market will punish you. Because he had a stoush with the actor Sam Neill, just about planning, and this was in that program to Pavlova Paradise Revisited. I watched that, and they were talking about that.
The first Queenstown was the result of the gold rushes of the 1860s. This Queenstown is a result of another gold rush, the property gold rush of the 1970s, 80s and 90s, which made it a New Zealand boomtown. And a boomtown where environmental policy was controlled by Warren Cooper, a man who's many times been mayor of Queenstown, who was known to his supporters as Mr. Queenstown, and to his Labour critics in Parliament when he was an MP as the artist formerly known as One Coat Warren, or to his bitter critics, Two Coats Warren. He's been mayor for so long that his decisions have been dominant in planning policy, and he's a believer in the free market in planning. The free market which has turned Queenstown into that, from a landscape that could have been, if properly managed, very much like that. And the question is, in these Lakeland wars, was it inevitable? Today, Warren Cooper's building his own business complex, slap bang in the middle of town. The top floor is a luxury penthouse retirement home for him and his wife Lorraine. So here we are, and you hear the construction noise all around. It's like the empire in which the concrete never sets. And it's creeping up the hill here. I mean, this is going to look like an eyesore with all this stuff on it.
Well, what's it like in Grimsby?
Well, Grimsby's flat.
It's all a matter of human perception, individual idiosyncrasies.
This relaxed attitude to planning has earned Cooper a world-class opponent.
The previous council started to lose all control about what was a desirable development and what was not. And they gave permission and these things are now being built, suburbs around Queenstown, creeping into the Wakatipu Basin. And I believe that to be wrong. This would not be permitted in any other sensible part of the world. If you go to England, for instance, to the Lake Districts, you can't build suburbs in the Lake Districts because it is a landscape of great importance. You can't build suburbs in the Cotswolds for the same reason, and you shouldn't be able to build suburbs in the Wakatipu Basin for exactly the same reason.
What's your message for the protesters?
The message is you've got to have balance. And the message is that there will always be development. It won't take place overnight, but there will be a point in time when those people that want to come to Queenstown could be turned off if it becomes garish, noisy, has the wrong sort of environmental quality altogether. And you can only do that because the market finally will say, not a judge in the Environment Court, not Warren Cooper, not Sam Neill, the market will finally say, as it is in all the resort areas on this planet.
I think Queenstown is well past that discussion as a community. And in fact, I think many of the older community are being disenfranchised or moving away. So we're losing continuity of voice.
It's very sad to see the way Queenstown is at the moment. The last 5 years it's grown so fast that we seem to have lost any sense of community in town. The locals are barely living here. Those like us that are hanging on don't know if we're welcome. We feel like we're actually being pushed out.
We have a system of planning a national system of planning for growth with Statistics New Zealand. I think it's below 0 is low growth, 0 to 1% is medium growth, 1 to 2% is high growth. Well, what happens when you're 5% growth in population numbers and about the equivalent in visitor numbers over a 30-year period? It's off the scale. Those rates of growth aren't planned for in our system of planning.
Oh, Sam Neill's a well-known lefty, but then he can afford to be.
Yeah, but I think on that point, you know, the idea of conservation, I think he had a point. He was saying that, like, he says you wouldn't be able to build that and if this was the Cotswolds or something like that, this is landscape of international significance. So
I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of time for the Sam Neills of this world, I've got to be honest with you, John. I'll explain why.
Well, me neither. I don't either at all, except for that. I think that, you know, it's a matter of values. I was, years ago, I was about 2000, I was walking down Mount Roy and I met talking to this.
Sorry, just to explain to listeners, because people won't know who we are talking about. Mount Roy is actually
that's Wanaka.
Yeah, that's right.
In Wanaka, and I was talking to this guy who's a retired geologist from the United States Geological Service, and we're talking about this, and he's saying, you're ruining this country. And he was looking, him and his wife were looking around in various places around the world that had just what they wanted, and they were going to Tasmania. And yeah, I think, you know, what's happened is that you'd kind of, if Warren Cooper's formula was true, you'd expect sort of to stop. But the reality is that, you know, with globalisation, you've got the whole of China.
Rick says, Michael, you mentioned those bus crashes. I'd be interested to know if the drivers were local. I suspect they weren't, says Rick. No, they weren't. They were Chinese. And I don't know if the rest of New Zealand knows this. We know this because we are a tourist place, Central Otago, Queenstown, Lakes area, Mackenzie country. It's all sort of in my bailiwick, I'm afraid. But almost all of the tourism that happens here is Chinese generated, particularly, goes through a Chinese network. There are very few locals involved at all. So what I mean by that is it'll be a Chinese tourism company who arranges for a Chinese transport agency in this country, or owned, who arranges to go and stay at a Chinese-owned hotel, who go to Chinese retail stores, or stores, yes, as a large result. So the Chinese in particular, tourist, never tends to stray from China when they come here. And Chinese companies have set themselves up, even just down the road from me, Chinese distribution companies, you know, trucks owned by the Chinese people, Chinese nationals from China, and again servicing that particular Chinese tourism industry. It's a bit of a misnomer that Chinese tourists come to this country and get a New Zealand experience. They don't. They get a Chinese experience in New Zealand, not a New Zealand experience in New Zealand. So yesterday, those bus drivers will be Chinese, and they will not have been driving for the conditions. They weren't, Rick. They were stupid. They recklessly endangered. I'm sorry, I see it all the time.
And
I tell you, 30,000 people in Queenstown is not a lot of people. I mean, to live.
Yeah, but it's for the locality and because of the way it's built.
Yeah, but no, there's a lot of land in Queenstown, which is why your developers are going and developing it. And there's a lot of land around Queenstown and between Queenstown and Arrowtown, going down further, going south of as well.
It's pretty ugly, though, isn't it, a lot of it? I mean,
well, it's only ugly because it's being built now. It won't be ugly when it's finished. And so...
but what they've built is ugly.
I don't agree with you. I could go anywhere in the world and show you exactly the same. Particularly if I took you to Europe. Once those things are built, well, Europe's obviously a bit different in some of the areas like Bruges, but I mean, or Prague. But in terms of new infrastructure, if people want to come, people want to come. What are you going to say? You can't come?
Oh yeah, but I'm talking about the infill housing and so on. Like if you go around like the centre of Queenstown, and because I used to spend quite a bit of time there, and just you know, you're walking around the evening and that and going past these places. It used to be nice. You used to be able to stand down in Queenstown and point to where your workmates lived. You know, one lives up there, and then they all got priced out. And another thing, someone at Cromwell told me, she said that the Chinese would buy everything from Arrowtown to Queenstown. I mean, if that process continues, it's grow. You know, you have too much of a good thing. I just think it's a shame that we haven't preserved New Zealand's lifestyle better. Not just for the wealthy, because the wealthy can always
at the light. To be honest with you, John, Queenstown is an international destination. International visitors demand particular amenities. Those amenities require people to service them. New Zealanders are flocking there to work in those areas. There's no unemployment. School is one of the best in terms of academic records, one of the best schools in Otago South, and Otago South and the best schools in New Zealand. I'm talking about state schools as well. I disagree with you, I'm sorry, but hey, we're allowed to. What are your thoughts? 0800 33 22 83. It is 12 minutes to 12. John, welcome to the show. Good morning to you.
Good morning. With regards to the dairy payout, that was for Callaghan's point. He did a presentation about how we could lift ourselves up, and his recommendation was to have niche, because he was a scientist, entrepreneur, so he thought we should have niche things that no one knows what they do. But he said, what about tourism? And he said, let me tell you something, more tourism makes us poorer. And in 2011, tourism earned 80,000 per worker, whereas 120,000 was needed to maintain our living standards. And today, tourism earns just under 70,000 per worker.
Well, look, maybe we need more tourists. This will be great. Our Prime Minister believes that. He's Minister of Tourism. Tourism's great. If you walk across the Tongariro Crossing, you'll only meet 600 people on that. Perhaps we need to have a few thousand people doing the Tongariro Crossing every day. Instead of 10,000 visitors to Milford Sound every week, we could have, say, 40,000. That would be rather nice, wouldn't it? And that would make us rich.
Hi there. Well, you probably heard quite a lot of chatter about tourism recently, because it is rapidly becoming a critical part of our economy. It's always been important, but in recent times we've seen record numbers of tourists coming to New Zealand. They're coming for longer and they're spending more. So we're doing extremely well. About 3.2 million tourists came last year. Australia is our biggest market. In every market we have growth, but in the case of China, our second largest market, it grew somewhere between about 35 and 40% last year. Big increase in the number of tourists coming from China. About 400,000 Chinese came. We think that's on track to be 1 million a few years from now, because you're just seeing exponential growth coming out of the Chinese market. And the big challenge for us now, I think, is not just to continue to attract more tourists and even higher quality tourists. It is really to make sure that we spread out the number of tourists and when they come. Typically, we've been a market where people have come between November and March, and the aim of working on issues like, or areas like business tourism, is to spread that out, but also to make sure that we have even more markets that are coming and we have the infrastructure to cope with the people that come. So tourism, it's a huge employer in our economy. About 1 in 8 jobs. It is really making a big difference. About $1 billion a year, I think, is given to the government via GST from tourists when they're in our country. So they make a significant contribution. They're welcomed, and it's a great way of showcasing our country to the rest of the world.
Let me tell you something very interesting about New Zealand. Our per capita GDP is about $40,000 a year. There are 1.3 million jobs in New Zealand, 1.3 million FTE. That means to maintain our current per capita GDP, we need $120,000 per job. What does tourism earn? About $80,000 a job. About 2/3 of what we need. More tourism, poorer you get. Tourism is great for employing unskilled people. It is absolutely not a route to prosperity. The wine industry, of which we're so proud, $90,000 a job. So why have we got any prosperity at all? Well, food manufacturing comes in pretty close to the average, but up at the top there is Fonterra. Without the dairy industry, New Zealand would be desperately poor. It's an astonishing thing. $350,000 a job in the dairy industry. Unfortunately, the workers don't get paid that much, but that's what it earns.
See, I always tell people about the conversation. So I guess my history was I was at Jardin for a couple of years. I did a BCom, BProp at Auckland Uni. So I was always interested in the finance and the property sector. And I remember you sat me down, we're on an OE, we're sitting in Italy, and we talked about getting into business together and, you know, kind of something that we could do as a family. And I guess what would be real great for the listeners is if you ran me through the what you told me about the three kind of different ways people have made money kind of through history. I think that's I found that really valuable.
Yeah. So I looked at it and said, well, if you go away and look at the rich list of, say, a country like New Zealand,
yeah,
it's really dominated by lots of people. And I think that's true around the world. So the first is you just got a phenomenal talent at something. Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, you know, you can name the people. And through that skill, they're an Adele, they're Elton John, you know, they have a particular skill and they can monetize that to mind-blowing levels. And, that's out there. It's really difficult, and it's even more difficult in a country like New Zealand where, say, some of our most famous sports people are All Blacks, and they're, frankly, on a world scale, not paid that well for that.
Yeah.
So that was one way. The second way is they establish a business. So think of someone like a Rod Duke sets up Briscoe's.
Briscoe's, yeah.
You know, he's been phenomenally successful, great retailer, made a ton of money, on the rich list at $1 billion. And that is more, I want to say common because there's not a lot of rods out there. But again, if you look at it, there's a lot of those people that have invested in business done, you know, phenomenally well. But the third category is property, and it's not third in the rankings. In fact, at the moment, the Inland Revenue Department is going through a thing where they've gone to the 400 wealthiest New Zealanders, and in theory, I don't know how they work that out, we're on that list. And so they are going through a mountain of different questions about assets and trusts and who earns and all this sort of stuff. But what we hear why they're doing that is because they think that a lot of wealth has been created for those people through property.
Through property, yeah.
This is Olivia Wensley, CEO of startup Queenstown Lakes. The former litigation lawyer sees a bright future beyond just tourism.
The average worker contributes $70,000 a year to the GDP. In tourism, and so the average tech worker brings in $400,000. So it's quite a big difference.
Well,
that's
my answer
total
to that,
size.
yes, well, my reply to Paul Callaghan would be, so what's your alternative, mate? Because between tourism and Fonterra, or at least the dairy industry, that's what's kept New Zealand going over the last 15 years.
Yeah, but the point is that the tourism industry rose on the back of mass
cheap labour.
migration.
And cheap labour.
Well, yeah. Well, it did. And as Ha-Joon Chung says in 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, he gives an example of an Indian bus driver and a Swedish bus driver, and the Swedish bus driver earns 50 times more than the Indian, although he says the Indian's a better driver because he has to dodge the cow and so on. But he says the only thing is that we maintain borders.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think that, that's quite relevant towards, you were talking about Central Otago the other day, and I always think of that, what does it really mean when we say Central Otago is booming?
I guess it means that large numbers of people want to live here, and not only do they want to, but they are moving here, and the value of homes, farms, labour is higher proportionately here than other parts of the country as a consequence.
But the value
supply
of
and demand.
Yeah, that reminds me of Crocodile Dundee when he's in New York, and he says this must be a great place to live. A great place because so many people want to live here.
Well, that's probably true.
Well, yeah, but there's also a thing about, do we need cities or do we want to live in cities?
Yes, we do. That's why we live in them.
Well, no, I think effectively we need to live in them because, well, for instance, studies show that people prefer cities of
John,
no greater than 250,000.
Where do you live as an example?
Christchurch.
Okay, that's New Zealand's second largest city. Why do you live there? You must have chosen to live there.
Well, I don't really, because where else are you going to live?
Well,
it's a matter of income.
Don't be silly. Well, you've got the entire South Island. Oh, you listen, I can only live in Christchurch. You can't move. You can't stray outside the city boundaries. Of course you can.
Yeah, but not. Well, it just so happens, I would have to sell my house and so on. But
that's right. You'd have to sell your house if you really wanted to live there. John, listen, I've got to go to the 11 o'clock news. Nice chat to you, but what do you think? Chris, I'll see you. We'll come to you on the other side of the news. It's 11 o'clock now.
On the 19th of December, I phoned at 11:31 and Michael had been talking to Shane Jones about the fast track bill, and I asked what he meant by growing the economy, but I said because as far as I can see it's mostly about property development. And I also said, and you haven't addressed the fact that real wages have been falling in tourism and hospitality. He said he didn't accept that they were falling, and gave the example of his daughter earning something like $28-25 an hour in hospitality in Queenstown. I quoted Sir Paul Callaghan. He said he's dead. I said that it's the trend that matters. I also quoted Ian Harrison of Tail Risk Economics from his paper, The Superdiversity Myth, who said that the distinctive feature of the New Zealand economy is that land is an important input into the productive process. This is obvious with the agricultural, fishing and forestry sectors, but it also applies to international tourism. And a simple model of the New Zealand economy where the supply of land is fixed and New Zealand's isolation means it's not a natural location for the production of a broad range of internationally traded goods and services, then an increase in the labour supply through large-scale immigration will reduce the marginal product of labour. As a result, real wages will fall, owners of land will benefit, there will be an outflow of native labour in search of higher wages in Australia. The economy will be bigger, but average incomes will fall. Resources will flow into low-value service production. I could have quoted David Williamson, a senior lecturer in Auckland's AUT School of Hospitality and Tourism, who said on RNZ that the reality is that my PhD showed that real hourly wages in the tourism and hospitality sector have fallen 24.5% between 1979 and 2006. So you're seeing a real drop-off in wages coming into that sector. That's from Insight New Zealand's tourism workforce, imported or homegrown. And he also said privately, yes, this is a long-term trend that not many people in New Zealand want to talk about. It affects all but the elite workforce, and it's a result of the neoliberal revolution of the 1980s. We have gained considerable economic growth and consumer choice, but the rewards of that growth are increasingly concentrated into the hands of the ones with established capital. Wage earners are losing year after year. Unfortunately, that session isn't online, so Platform Plus subscribers can't listen to it. Michael Laws is a former MP and Mayor and is now Deputy Chairman of the Otago Regional Council. The point of Ian Harrison's take on it all is that that's what I choose to believe, and the evidence seems to back it up. But what matters, I think, is that the government and the elites, they have their pet theories, or they have their official truths, and they just suppress the ideas that they don't want. And the question I want to address is, what does it really mean when they talk about Central Otago booming, and when they talk about the economy booming, and when they talk about the economy growing? Because as we all know, in tier 1 cities, like where I live in Christchurch, they've just done away with zoning. And so your neighbour, a property developer can just, maybe the investor has sat on a rental for decades, and they can just tear it down and they can just take all your sunlight. They're not going to do it like they do in Singapore, where they buy a whole block, and the government buys a whole block at fire sale prices, bulldozes them all, and rebuilds them well. And then you have people moving down from Auckland because they have pressure there. They're worried about crime in Auckland now. A Chinese person who moved to Auckland in the 1990s told me that he feels safer in China than he does in Auckland. And in line with the pressure on land, you notice that low-value services, things like tourism and bus transport and so on, their yards are they're always squeezed. And that situation's probably the same all over the country. Unpleasant working conditions in low-value services. This is from the Southern District Health Board, Central Otago Housing, the Human Story. Go down to the introduction. In 2018, the Central Otago District was the third fastest growing territorial authority area in New Zealand. The top spot was taken by its neighbour, the Queenstown Lakes District. Such population booms are usually driven by natural resource extraction or amenity migration. Central Otago's earliest boom during the 1860s gold rush was due to the former. The current boom is at least partially due to the latter, as relatively wealthy people moved to Central Otago for its perceived lifestyle benefits. But Queenstown Lakes District housing pressure is also driving the current boom as the labour workforce is displaced into Central Otago townships. In turn, the Central Otago's boom demands its own labour supply, bringing further migrants to the district. Labour supply services created the most jobs in Central Otago in 2018, followed by grape growing. Unlike typical amenity migrants, labour supply migrants are not wealthy. Along with the majority of the Central Otago population who earn considerably less on average than their New Zealand compatriots, these migrants need somewhere affordable to live. Typical for a boomtown, Central Otago's economic indicators look rosy. In 2018, the region enjoyed over 4% growth in GDP, employment and mean annual income. Tourism GDP was 11% and the proportion of working-age beneficiaries decreased, but these benefits are not universally bestowed. Increased inequality commonly occurs in boomtowns. Further, amenity migrants usually have higher incomes and education levels than the majority of long-term residents. This increases the boomtown median income, creating false perceptions of local income growth. Boomtowns are also associated with increased housing pressure, living costs and social divide. Migrants and locals in natural amenity boomtowns often reach conflict due to cultural, value and attitudinal differences. Other common impacts include shortages of key social services and displacement of those who can no longer afford to live in the area. During amenity migration booms, population displacement due to unaffordable housing usually results in residents moving to neighbouring towns and commuting to work. For example, Cromwell is increasingly supplying housing for the Queenstown Lakes workforce. Housing pressure then extends to these neighbouring towns. Traffic congestion is increased and quality of life is lost. Negative boomtown impacts on neighbouring towns can occur without the corresponding economic benefits. Professionals working in central Otago are increasingly telling stories of local hardship that are typical of boomtowns. These stories are not captured by commonly reported housing affordability statistics. Thus, the human impact of central Otago's boom has remained largely hidden behind glowing economic indicators. Complex situations such as the human experience of local housing pressure require a depth of understanding that qualitative approaches are best placed to offer.
I'm sure there's a point in there somewhere, Mike.
Okay, so what? No, but yeah.
Is there?
Getting at, because we were talking about like China and India, which economy is doing best. I don't think that matters. It's kind of the potential of your country to benefit its citizens based on its geographics and its resources.
Okay. No, thanks, Mike. No, I'm sure there's an interesting expedition that is going on in your mind just quietly at the moment, and you're out there somewhere slashing through the bush. I'll let you carry on doing that. Nice to talk to you, I think.
All these material things we have formed. But what of the human side? What have we done for our people? We have done much. New Zealand has always paid high regard to the welfare of the people, their health, their homes, their education, their occupations, and their freedom. Let us look at random at a few of the monuments which testify to this national concern for human well-being.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! When migrant rights are under attack! Stand up, fight back! When migrant rights are under attack! No more exploitation! No more exploitation! This is a migrant nation! This is a migrant nation! No more exploitation! No more exploitation! This is a migrant nation! This is a migrant nation! No more exploitation! No more exploitation! Strike! Strike! No more exploitation! No more exploitation! This is a migrant nation! This is a migrant nation!
John, please pass the better peanut butter.
Bread and better. That's what healthy girls are made of, too.